aviation has created jet engines. It's one of the safest industries to be part of. It's the safest way to travel. You're safer getting on a plane than walking down the road. So there's lots of good things that can be done, lots of skills, but it's being utilised in the wrong areas. So if we can transform the industry and use those people, I don't want to say use, but use those skills that those people have for social good, whether that's in aviation or somewhere else, then let's do that.
The main greenwashing for me is the sustainable aviation fuel narrative, because they think they can just carry on making these aircraft that are going to be flying for another 25 years. Airbus and Boeing have got 10 years worth of orders on their books, so we're going to make exactly the same technology we've always made, a traditional jet engine, and talk about dropping in like synthetic fuels. And these fuels can't be scaled, and they're much more expensive, and they're just sort of, as with many things, sort of pie in the sky.
Pilots are not really that different to the general public. So the same greenwashing that we receive is very similar to what everyone else receives. There's a little bit extra, like a funny story was that before the pandemic, we were, as pilots, you get like a little handbook in flight deck, which has all the emergency procedures in it. And on the back, there's like it used to be called like a fuel saving checklist, on how to save as much fuel. Essentially, we were told your salaries would go up if you become more efficient. That didn't happen. When we came back from the pandemic, that same checklist had a green border put around it. And the title was changed to sustainability measures. So it was quite literally greenwashing.
Wow.
So it's those sort of things. It was like in the film when the posters up in the airport saying Northern Runway will take us close to them to net zero. In the small print, if you discount all the planes taking off. But I think some of the main narratives are expanding aviation is good for jobs, it's good for workers, which is not true. A study came out last week by Transport Environment that showed that expanding airports actually, at this point, is having a bit of a negative returns in terms of prosperity around airports, because it's actually acting as a sponge, taking people out of the community and away and spending their money elsewhere rather than in this country. Aviation is also becoming more of a capital-intensive industry, so it used to be quite labour-intensive because we were building lots of planes. But the number of jobs per aircraft has been going down for decades. So the more it expands, doesn't necessarily mean there's more jobs. That's if you discount, of course, like the climate impacts and how that's going to impact people's jobs with industry crash and biodiversity collapse and societal collapse. Ignore all those things, which is quite a big thing to ignore. It's still not great. So that's quite difficult a narrative to get across to the average person who's not really engaging with this on any deep level. Expansion usually means good things for you. Growth means good things. And that's growth. It's quite difficult to undermine that.
Body is experiencing eco-anxiety because it exists in the collective subconscious, and I think as more and more people connect the dots, that I think eco-anxiety was so bad for a few of us at the beginning because the load wasn't being shared. And she's also helped me understand that there's this sort of sense of conscientious objectors in the Second World War where the industry that you once trusted, the government you once trusted, when you realise they're not doing as you thought they were, and you feel betrayed. If that industry and government overnight said, actually, we've got the numbers wrong, we're going to do what we need to based on mainstream science, then the anxiety's gone. So thank you for feeling into that and responding to it in a congruent way. Sharing a Guardian article, talk about the impact of climate change with those people quite a lot of them were quite defended. There was a couple of deniers in there, and it got quite hostile. I was ostracised and bullied, I can only say, to the point that I had to leave that group to protect my mental health. But I think, what the issue is psychologically, in my experience, is if you spent your entire life wanting to do something from the age of 5 or you've got such a sense of self and identity in being a pilot or whatever role it is in the industry, it's quite a nice, luxurious kind of privileged life you can lead in if you carry on with that. So I think when someone says actually there's this thing that might challenge your sense of self and the way in which you chose to earn money in the world, I think naturally that gets people's defences up, and so there is that. But also at the time it was a mainstream narrative in the press, but is climate change man-made or not? It was still a lot more denial. I think as the landscape shifted the last 4 or 5 years, it seems a lot more palatable to a lot more aviation workers. They have studied meteorology, for pilots especially, and I think they are starting to connect the dots.
My experience being trying to do it, working in safe landing and trying to talk to the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, it's like smashing your head against the wall. It's really quite frustrating. So we still do that because it's still worth doing, but we give it as much energy as it's worth, which is maybe not that much. Instead, it's really exciting that someone like Zach Polanski agrees because a lot of the stuff that we have been banging on about for so long is now being talked about in the mainstream media on a regular basis. And I think that's very hopeful, because I think when people hear it, like, everyone knows that climate change exists and we need to do something about it, but it's such a mainstream narrative that it's going to be everyday people, it's going to cost you so much money, and you're going to have to change your entire lives, and it's not quite true. So when someone like Zach comes on and his colleagues and talks about something like a frequent flyer levy, it's really quite positive. So I think there's a lot of things to be hopeful for. We're speaking with the Green Party in 2 weeks' time. Sean Berry, who heads up the transport part of the Green Party, wants to talk to us about policy, wants to talk to us about workers' assemblies. So suddenly all these doors that have been locked shut, all the lobbyists are inside talking to the Labour Party and the Conservatives. Suddenly another door's opened up, and the Green Party are welcoming us in and saying, we really want to work with you. So I think there's a lot to be hopeful for, but to get to the point where we have a Green government, we've got quite an uphill struggle. That's probably going to involve lots of people in this room. A bit like how Nigel Farage has been able to influence government for so many years without being an MP and drag everything very far to the right. Safe Landing and other groups can drag everything, I don't know if left is a useful term, but in the opposite direction. So even if Greens don't get in, the fact that they're dragging the Labour Party to the left, as we're seeing with taxes, and we'll see what the budget holds. But it's clearly putting a lot of pressure on them. They're clearly feeling a lot of their members, a lot of their votes being pulled in the opposite direction. So that's something that Safe Landing can do, is influence the Green Party, to influence the Labour Party, to put them further towards progressive policies.
We are also working with the Global Solidarity Levy Task Force that are currently at COP30, and I think this is going to be quite a defining COP. We recently saw a landmark ruling at the International Court of Justice that said that any companies or states that are not moving in line with a 1.5 degree world is a breach of our human rights, and I think there's going to be a lot of legal challenges. One of the risks we've often spoke to when we're talking to the industry, they want to understand risk, they want to understand profit margins. We'll frequently see the industry get hit by cyclical sort of global events, and our narrative is if we don't slow down, then we're going to go off that cliff edge, and that will be essentially, could be the UN or whoever put an international law out and saying, look, we've busted through aviation's carbon budget, we're now going to have mass redundancies and have to do what we should have done a long time ago.
A small amount of emissions, and just targeting private jets wouldn't do enough, anywhere near enough. But it's symbolic. The biggest thing, as Todd said, is the frequent flyers. We have to look at progressive policy that targets frequent flyers. And frequent flyers, we kind of think, oh, it's Jeff Bezos. Well, it's not actually, it's like regular people. And that doesn't mean that anyone's evil for flying often. It just means that we've been brought into a world. I used to fly every other year to Canada, and can't imagine what the carbon footprint of that is. It's probably massive. But we've been brought into this world that requires a lot of flying. So we do need to create the money and disincentivise that frequent flying. And a frequent flyer levy does essentially that. The first flight of the year would be the same price as it would normally be. But every time you fly after that, the price would exponentially increase. And that would do two things. It would disincentivise frequent flying, which needs to happen. but it would also raise the money needed to decarbonise aviation and bring all those solutions forward from where they are right now. I expect for a tax on aviation fuel to happen. In an ideal world, there would be an agreement about what that money would be used for, rather than just going straight into the exchange. I mean, I still think that'd be useful, because I think if you had a government that you could trust, they would put that money into useful things, regardless of where it goes. And like green businesses, you can think of like solar panels and wind farms, but healthcare is a green business, social care is a green business. All of those things that bring social good don't necessarily have sustainable put in front of them. But I think it would be much more palatable for certainly sometimes with aviation workers. If we said a tax on aviation would go, some of it would go into greening aviation. I expect that would be useful to envelope some of that for that, and then put some of it into train travel or bus travel to make that much more cheaper and accessible to the average person, because it's still so much cheaper to get the plane, get the train everywhere. Buses are expensive, so we can make that cheaper by moving money away from aviation in a fair way to make a sustainable option the best option, the cheaper option.
I was on stage with the head of sustainability from Lufthansa, the Green Tech Festival in Berlin a year ago, and there was a question around like, you know, if I had a question, but the host asked me if I had a question for her, and I didn't, other than to say like, I recognise how difficult her job is, because for me, like, if we still exist within a limited company structure where the whole existence of the company is to generate profit above all else, then we're just going to continue to create profit at a cost of harm to our own health and the planet. So like, for me, there's a broader question of, you know, if Zach Polanski or whoever, you know, if we've had an economic system that didn't just value GDP, which could include the arms industry, tobacco, fossil fuels, but also health and well-being, then we might actually be able to see sort of free public transport and, you know, an airline industry that was socially beneficial. But yeah, it's quite a big picture and hard to get there, but it's hopefully.